All right, boys and girls. Well, today I'm going to do a fun video that a bunch of you have been asking for, and it actually kind of relates to this trip that I did up in Canada where I got to ride literally some of the craziest, deepest snow in the steepest terrain that this world has to offer. I went up there, I flew up there, and I got to use a sled from CycleWorks out of Edmonton. They were gracious enough to let me borrow a brand new snowmobile out of the crate, which was awesome. The only problem with that snowmobile was it was a 155, and I was going to ride with Muskoka Freerider, who I knew was going to try to punish me in the steepest, gnarliest terrain that he knows of, and which he did. And so I knew that a 155 wasn't going to be for me up there with my agenda of trying to keep up with Matt in his backyard. So my first call was to him to ask him, hey dude, do you have a 165 skid that I can use in this stock boost that I'm going to be riding for the week? And he said, yeah, no problem, but it's a Chaos. And I said, no worries, dude. I can make that work. And so this goes hand in hand with what a bunch of you guys have been asking and what you had some questions about on our limiter strap video. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break down completely what the differences are between a Pro and a Chaos and how I ride the stock suspension, both Pro and Chaos. So yeah, let's get into the nuts and bolts of it. So again, Matt had a 165 Chaos skid, but I wanted to make it more Pro friendly. So basically what I did is I brought with me a Pro limiter strap, and which I could have just drilled the Chaos limiter strap shorter, but what I wanted to do is I wanted to show you the difference that the two limiter straps are. Okay, so you can see it's like probably close to an inch, 5/8, 3/4 of an inch to an inch longer a Chaos strap is than a Pro. Okay, so what does that actually do? So let me talk to you about that. So sucking down the limiter strap, what that does is it takes, so a longer limiter strap gives you less ski pressure. Sucking down the limiter strap or making it shorter gives you more ski pressure. Okay, and what that does, again, it allows the sled, if you're running a Pro limiter strap, it allows the sled to go forward versus lifting the front end. Okay, so in addition to the longer limiter strap, a Chaos has a longer front track shock as well. So again, when I brought my Pro limiter strap, I put the Pro limiter strap on the Chaos skid. What I also did, you can see here, the Chaos front track shock has, you know, about a 1/4 inch of preload that the shock has on the spring. So I also backed that off. So you can see here, this is a Pro skid frame. The Pro comes from the factory with no preload. So again, what Polaris's goal on a Chaos is to make it more fun and playful and lighter steering effort in that more neutral terrain. So you can see how that would work, right? You have a longer limiter strap with the Chaos, and you have more preload, which is pushing down on the phone call. Nothing important right now. So again, with the preload being longer and stiffer and a longer Chaos shock, it is taking pressure away from the skis. Okay, so again, my agenda was to go up. So to go up, what I needed to do was have a Pro. So installed the Pro limiter strap, backed off the preload on the Chaos shock. That got me really close to a Pro in the front track shock area. Now, secondary is the next difference between a Pro and a Chaos on the rear suspension is on the rear track shock, we have one difference, and that is the spring rate. Okay, so the spring rate on a Pro is a 210-pound spring versus a 180-pound spring in a Chaos. So again, I'm working with a Chaos rear suspension up in Canada, wanting to make it more of a pro. The spring rate on a Chaos is softer again, so when you give it gas, it wants to lift that front end. All of these things. So maybe what I'll do, why don't I do this? Why don't I tell you the 3 main differences between a Pro and a Chaos, okay? And we've already gone through a few of them. Number 1, the limiter strap is longer on a Chaos versus a Pro. Number 2, the front track shock is also longer on a Chaos versus a Pro. And number 3, you have the rear track shock. The spring rate is softer on a Chaos, so it collapses easier to lift the front end, okay? Those are the 3 main differences. Now, for you guys who have a 2024 or newer sled, the rail profile is actually the same. It's a common rail, which is very helpful for the guys who are wanting to go between a Pro and a Chaos, okay? For you guys who have a 22 and 23 Matrix, your Pro rail is a different profile. It's a shallower angle than a Chaos. The Chaos is a steeper one. So for a guy who owns a 22 or 23 Pro wanting to make his sled more of a Chaos, that's where we use the Ice Age Chaos conversion, where we do the rails and the limiter strap, okay? So I know that's kind of a lot of info, but I'm going to recap again. What I want, again, my agenda was to have a Pro to be able to follow Matt and some gnarly stuff on he had a 175 Skidoo on one day, and then he had a pretty awesome modded Polaris. So I wanted to have as much advantage as I could. So again, I turned my Chaos skid essentially into a Pro by putting a Pro limiter strap, softening the preload of my Chaos shock, taking the preload out of it. So again, a softer preload on the spring allows the sled to crawl up on top of the snow instead of pushing down into the snow. And then lastly, I took the Chaos rear track shock that does have a softer spring, and I added about a 1/4 inch of preload, making it again essentially a Pro. So I hope that helps kind of break down and talk about the difference between a Pro and a Chaos. Let's go the other way, right? So I took a Chaos and made a Pro. For the guys who are wanting a Pro to be more like a Chaos, unfortunately, there's not a ton of options, and I'll tell you why. Because with a Pro front track shock, you can't make it longer because, well, you're limited by the shock. Versus a Chaos shock, we can suck it down and make it shorter. Okay, I hope that makes sense. So again, for you guys with a Pro, there's a couple things you can do, right? You can back off the spring rate. So you have a heavier duty spring on your Pro than you do a Chaos. So if you wanted to make it softer, so it actually, when you give it gas, it lifts up, you can back off the preload of the spring, and you can also soften up the compression on the clickers. So let's talk about that as well. So that was one adjustment I also made. So on the Pro Velocity shocks, there is a compression adjustment clicker. Okay, so for me, what I did for full hill climb mode, I softened everything up on the front track shock. Yes, I compromised a little bit of my trail capabilities in the bumps, but I wanted this shock to be super soft to be able to crawl up on top of that deep snow I was riding in. Vice versa, in the rear, remember I added preload to the spring to make it stiffer, so when I accelerated, it didn't lift the front end, it made my suspension go forward. So I also, on the compression side of things, I increased the compression just like 2 or 3 clicks. So again, making the rear suspension, or the rear track shock stiffer and the front track shock softer. Climb up on top of the snow with this part of the suspension, get the snowmobile to move forward with this part of the suspension. All right. So that's a lot to cover. You'll probably have to watch this a couple times. And then on the ski shocks, you know, for me, the ski shocks are set pretty dang good right out of the factory. There's a little personal preference there, but I run the clickers kind of in the middle. I run the preload kind of where it comes from. And on the ski stuff, I run that pretty much from the factory for the way I like to ride. But in the rear, as you can tell by this video, there's a ton of adjustments. And so, yeah, I hope that helps. This really helped me from a sled setup standpoint to be able to keep up with essentially a bone stock snowmobile in some gnarly terrain, chasing around all those guys with some fun goodies on their sled. So again, if you have any questions, make sure you drop it in the comments. And yeah, there's a lot of adjustability on the stock sled, and it allows you to beat your buddies. And well, that was my main focus, was to go up there and kick some butt.